Formula One season is almost upon us, and it all kicks off with a launch from Haas of their car, the VF24. Well, sort of. In true Haas spirit, they provided lovely visuals of the car, but we haven't seen it in person. And with a big top-level change in management of the team, are they going to be able to claw back those spaces on the grid? Well, here to discuss it with me, Bryn Lucas, I've got Alex Kalinauckas and Jake Boxall-Legge. First of all, gents, great to see you here. Hello.
Hello, Bryn. Yes, thanks for having us. I think we're just about recovering from the shock of Lewis Hamilton's transfer to Ferrari for 2025. It's certainly it's easily the most exciting thing to have happened in Formula One in many a year. Arguably the biggest driver transfer shock or move ever. And yeah, it certainly messed up what had been expected to be a nice quiet end to the week. Little bit of news of the Haas livery coming out, but then no, we rip up all our plans and start again.
I think I picked a pretty good day to have off yesterday. I woke up relatively late. I did have a meeting, and then suddenly everything started happening. So obviously we're in good hands, and everybody was able to sort of do it without me. But yeah, it was fun to watch along as kind of almost as a spectator of sorts. It's such a big move, but back down to earth with Haas, I guess.
JBL, you were sorely missed. Obviously, it goes without saying. Now, listen, yesterday was a seminal moment, but today is a big moment for Haas. They've revealed the car. We've seen these amazing renders, as usual, with Haas. It doesn't look dramatically different to last year. A lot more carbon, but pretty much the same. What are your thoughts? Let's start with you, Alex. Go on.
Yeah, it's not the new car. We knew that coming in. The team was saying, don't expect anything. It would just be the livery. And I mean, it's barely a change. They've changed the nose. It's less white. It sort of makes it look, because I often found watching the car trackside, you'd see it head on or you'd see it sat in the pit lane, and it looks pretty bright and vibrant. And then it comes past you and it's quite dark. Well, now that's the whole car. So yeah, for me, it's sort of throwing it forward a little bit. It's evocative of the place Haas now finds itself in, which is a very, very difficult place.
I thought you were going to say a very dark place. JBL.
I think it is certainly an improvement livery-wise over last season, because, well, as Alex said, it sort of had this sort of kind of duality, and it's a lot more cohesive, I think, as a concept. Does put one in mind of the kind of Paul Stoddart era Minardis of the early 2000s. So maybe that's kind of a hallmark of where it expects to be, i.e. the back of the grid. But I do quite like it for a car that is basically naked carbon. They've done a decent job with it. I'm sort of getting a little bit tired of the naked carbon motif now. Obviously people doing it to save weight and all of that sort of thing, but it's sort of taking something away, and I think we need to go back a few years and have more vibrant color schemes on the grid like we did maybe 2017 or 2018 kind of time.
I always wonder just how much weight it really adds. I'm sure you both know the exact figures for that, but like we said, we've seen the renders of it, only the renders of it. But one thing that strikes me is that they haven't gone for a Red Bull clone. The side pods seem to be really wide. What do you think, Jay?
I think there's certainly some kind of Red Bull influences there, and if you kind of delve a little bit deeper into the kind of what the side pods that they've put on this launch car, or this launch render rather, what's there, you can kind of see there is kind of a wideness to it, but that's because they've gone for this kind of wider, shorter side pod inlet. And what you can do there is you just have the ability to kind of create this much bigger undercut around the side pod. So you're losing a little bit less energy with the airflow going around it because it's taking a much shorter path, less frictional losses, that kind of thing. Just energizes the air kind of going towards the back of the car. Obviously, there are the caveats that, again, these are launch renders. Haas is showing us only what it wants us to see. There are little bits and pieces here and there that might hint to the direction that it's taking. Certainly moving away from what it had for the majority of last season, something that it kind of moved towards with the Austin update that didn't work particularly well last season with side pod design. And then obviously the rear wing looks a little bit different as well. We've kind of got that exposed tip element that a few teams kind of experimented with in 2023. And what you're doing there is you're just powering up that top element. It's not going quite in the direction that F1 would want teams to go to, because it's creating this vortex at the tips, and that's basically working to kind of supplant what you would have with a traditional end plate. But I think, again, these are just elements of what Haas wants us to see of its new car. And I'm sure, when the music stops in Bahrain, obviously we'll see the full thing. But yeah, a few sort of bits and pieces to kind of hint at the direction that it's going with for 2024. Nothing out of the ordinary. Maybe it's got something big that it wants to show us a little bit later.
Well, Alex, a couple of weeks ago, we were sitting down talking about Guenther Steiner leaving, no longer remaining at Haas, how we wanted to announce this one. But they've got Komatsu in there now. Where does this, and you're going to love this line, where has that left Haas this season? Beautiful, right?
Very beautiful. Well, but I mean, going back to my sort of clumsy, I don't know, even if it made it to a full metaphor about the livery, it bears out, right? I think I'm worried about the future of this team. I'm worried if it is actually already in a dark place because of various things. So Steiner's gone on the basis that Gene Haas was unhappy with the results the team was getting. Okay, that's fine. But the results are not going to change anytime soon. And Io Komatsu has come out and very commendably been very honest in the team's press release that accompanied these renders being revealed. And he basically says, we still expect the car to be towards the back of the grid, if not last. Now, there's a lot to unpick there because, again, we go back to talk about car performance. Let's take McLaren, for example. It realised it was in trouble in terms of its previous car design development path around the time of the 2022 French Grand Prix. How long did it take to make a massive gain forwards? Exactly a year. Haas only realised it was in so much trouble with its car around the Austin, Mexico, heading to Brazil, that triple header when they introduced the massive upgrade in Austin. So when's it going to get particularly better, if it ever does? Well, the McLaren example is a year. It could be that it makes some steps across the 2024 season. But what worries me is that there's been a suggestion sort of reported about that at the really top levels of the team, and I'm talking sort of ownership levels, there is this expectation that things will get better somehow with having got rid of Steiner. But it just doesn't work like that in Formula One. And I think, there's obviously this focus on promoting from within. We know Haas, on the basis of this news today, has got a new technical director to replace Simone Resta. It's their former chief designer. He's now got to be replaced, and they're saying they're going to promote from within again. So that's all fine. And that's all this sort of efficiency drive that they're talking about being on. But if you're expecting radical change that will improve performance, that doesn't seem like the most logical way to achieve that. So it all adds up to a pretty murky situation at the moment. It doesn't sound very hopeful. We always want the best for Formula One teams, right? So I do hope things work out for Haas, but from what we're seeing and hearing, it's not a brilliant start. And then there's the other thing about Io Komatsu is that we met him. I went with my colleague Jonathan Noble to the Haas factory just a few days after he was announced as team principal, and he didn't. It was really nice to get to know him a little bit. I think when you see him in the media, he's going to be as direct as Guenther Steiner, but I don't think he'll be as widely appearing. I think they're contractually obliged to put him forward to Drive to Survive, but I can't see him being the same charismatic figure as Steiner. So that's one thing. That's fine. That's his approach. It does remove the sort of X factor from this team. It sort of leaves you wondering what really is the point in Haas at the moment, other than being an advertising vehicle for Gene Haas's machine tooling company. But at the same time, the trip to the Haas, so that it's their base in Banbury rather than the sort of factory, because obviously they're spread all across the world, right? But he didn't have a lot of answers. It was like, we were like, okay, so what are you going to do differently? Or I haven't told the team yet, so I can't tell you. Okay, that's absolutely fine. But at a certain point, he's going to have to explain how things are really going to change. And at the moment, we're just not seeing it.
Yeah, it's a tricky time for Haas. I mean, you mentioned McLaren there. They've got a very different business model. JBL, Haas, it's always hard for Haas as a Formula One team, given how they put that car together, a real hodgepodge of almost bought parts, aren't they? Can you go over this a bit more for us?
Yeah, sure. So when Haas came in, it was originally a kind of tie-up between taking Ferrari's powertrains and certain technical elements. The design and build was being handled at Dallara in Italy as well, different manufacturer there. And then it was being assembled at Haas's facilities in Banbury. Dallara is not as involved as it used to be. Ever since the preparations for 2022, it's taken up a much bigger position in kind of the Ferrari facility. So it's kind of a sort of a subset of Ferrari almost, that's doing the design and the build, and that has some ex and current Dallara employees in it, Haas employees, some people seconded from Ferrari as well. obviously there's no cross-pollination that as far as the the regulations are concerned. Any kind of parts that are used are allowed to be used because they're what we used to call non-listed components, now kind of transferable components. So it takes as much as it can from Ferrari in that sense, but it's not a centralized model, and that's the difficult thing, because you've got this one faction in Italy that wants a certain thing out of the car, and then it sort of almost sends it not quite gift wrapped, because Haas has to kind of put it back together in its facilities. But there's that kind of go between, that kind of link up between, okay, this is the car and this is what we think is best for it, but then the race team is going to run the cars that it thinks it in the best way that it thinks. So what Komatsu was wanted to do is try and ease that process of, I guess, getting that sort of link together between the two operations a little bit stronger. I think that's something that he thinks could be open for improvement. That's kind of part of the reason why he was brought in team principal, because Gene Haas thought we can do better with the resources that we have, and Komatsu agreed with that, whereas Steiner wanted a little bit more investment for the team to be maybe a little bit more autonomous. So that's kind of the bed that is made for itself. Whether it sticks with that in 5-10 years time, that's kind of up for debate, but as of now, this is the situation, and it does have to maximize that. But yeah, it's very, very different and very, very difficult to stitch those parts together and have something that's cohesive over a season, because we've not really seen that from Haas since maybe 2018, and that was year 3 of its project. We're now some years into it, and it's regressed.
Well, Alex, one thing that hasn't changed at Haas, and indeed at many of the teams for this season, is the driver lineup. Now, they've got a relatively experienced lineup with Hulkenburg and Magnussen, but what can those two do in that seat to help propel this team forward? And maybe JBL come in afterwards, because I reckon you two might conflict in your opinion slightly.
I mean, I think we do conflict in our opinions already on whether Haas should have essentially axed Guenther Steiner. But anyway, to be clear, I don't think they should have done. But anyway, on the drivers, what more can Nico Hulkenberg do, really, other than maybe line up in the right grid spot on the grid in Qatar? And just as a slight aside, spoke to him the next race in Austin and just asked him about, what happened? And shut the question down so fast I didn't even have time to react. So I sort of asked it again. He was like, no, just really didn't want to talk about it. Later explained to me that, for a man who's very, very confident in his abilities and in his place in the world, quite embarrassed by that little episode. But anyway, it's a massive aside. I thought he was brilliant last year. What else could he have done? He qualified the car where it was possible to qualify it, and it went backwards in the race because it couldn't do anything with the tyres. So I'd say Hulkenberg's in a pretty secure position. He's achieving, he only sets out in just the way he seems to drive the car all the time to achieve the exact maximum of the car, and he tries to do it. Kevin Magnussen's in a much harder position because his driving style in particular exacerbated the weakness of the Haas. He's very high energy. We did this big feature with Karun Chandok, the Sky F1 pundit, ex-F1 driver, of course, recently for Autosport magazine and for Autosport.com Plus. It's available there. There's a lovely plug for it. And we talked a lot about drivers with sort of high energy movements at the steering wheel, lots of little adjustments, and sort of Lance Stroll, Yuki Tsunoda, Joe Guan Yu, they were sort of coming up again and again and again. Then we got to Magnussen, and Karun was like, he's just in a field of his own. There's just so much energy, so much aggression, and that pays off in very specific circumstances. So think the reason why he was able to get pole position at Brazil in 2022, in the sprint or the sprint race pole, whatever it was. I think it does officially count as pole position. That's absolute nonsense. And again, I've gone off on a tangent, but that was really exposed last year. So if Haas hasn't, as in his tyres were in an even worse shape than Hulkenberg's, and he wasn't able to get on top of getting on a level with Hulkenberg over one lap, other than sort of sporadic instances such as Miami. So if that hasn't been fixed, and it suggests, as I talked about the lead times earlier, that it won't have been fixed unless there is something really, really different coming with the real car, it's going to be quite another challenging campaign for Magnussen. Again, you don't like to see it because I think he's got a great attitude and he's got a great place in Formula One. But it's certainly something that there was an imbalance in the driver lineup. But other than that, I spent a lot of time with the team last year. I was embedded with them over the Silverstone weekend for a feature for GP Racing, our other magazine, listening into their engineering debriefs. And what struck me was that they're just pros. Like, they just get on with it. They deliver things in their information and feedback in slightly different styles, but it's a proper grown up atmosphere in there. And when we've come from a few years of, Grosjean and Magnussen and the door smashing and whatever, and Nikita Mazepin and Mick Schumacher and their constant, almost at war at times, it was just a weird situation for the team. I think having those two seasoned pros, especially at a time where the team does appear to be in quite a lot of flux, that's really valuable to Haas.
Yeah, I think where Haas is on the grid, its position in Formula One, it has the best driver lineup that's pretty much available to it. It wanted to go back to experience after the Schumacher-Mazepin years of one driver smashing cars and snapping them in half, the other driver just being glacially slow and off the pace. It needed to have two drivers that were going to be that focal point and help the team realise that whatever drivers it's got in the cars, that's not the issue. That's not an issue, and it's just what they do to develop the car. So in that regard, Alex has already gone through it very forensically, as he's done with Karun for the features, and they are excellent. So I don't know if I've got too much added value to bring here, but I think, as I said, they're the best drivers that are available to the team. Hulkenburg, there's a reason why we put him in our top 10 drivers of the season. Really, really strong year. And when that car, in qualifying, the flaws were a lot less exposed because, you have the advantage of fresh tyres. You're not worrying about tyre wear or tyre management too much. So he could just go out there and do his thing and stick it, into Q3 more often than not. Front row at Canada before he had a penalty. Magnussen did struggle in that regard as well. And as Alex has already said, he just didn't mesh with the car particularly. So there was clearly something that happened between 2022 and 2023 that cost him quite a bit. So he'll be lobbying for something that switches to the characteristics of the year before's car. And it would just be nice to see them sort of on a little bit more even footing for 2024, because they are both very, very strong drivers. And, I think we all like to, they're both quite popular as well, so we all quite like to see them doing well.
Well, before we move on to the next question, JBL, you win the prize for the Love-In prize. I think that was lovely there, talking about Alex in such a nice way. And Alex, you win the prize, the golden prize, for the number of plugs you can fit into an answer. So well done there. Beautifully done, brilliantly promoted all the different aspects of what we have and where these podcasts go out and where you write and things like that. So beautifully done. But let's look at Formula One as a wider scale a little bit. If we could start with you, JBL. Formula One announced recently they've rejected Andretti's idea of joining the Formula One grid in 2025, but they've only sort of pushed the door shut gently, haven't they? They've left it open for maybe seeing them on the grid in the future. Now, loads of comments online have been like, well, you know what, Andretti should just buy Haas. They should just buy Haas. That's what's going to happen. How reasonable a notion is that?
I think for the time being, Haas is kind of relatively happy with where it is. It's getting a lot of exposure for the Haas CNC brand, which is kind of the whole raison d'etre of the team. Performances have been pretty poor. Gene Haas doesn't want to see that, as we've already explained. He wants much more appearances and the points, that kind of thing. But the thing is it's kind of happy doing its thing, and I'm not going to say treading water, because that sort of devalues what the team is doing, but I don't think it feels necessarily the reason to sell. But I can see in maybe 3-4 years' time, if things haven't improved, then yeah, sure. If Andretti's still interested and it still has the infrastructure, then it could very feasibly buy it. The problem is now with the rejection from Formula One, is Andretti able to keep that core of the team together purely on the proviso that it might have an entry for 2028? We don't know yet. So surely there will be some kind of discussions. There have already been discussions between Michael Andretti and Gene Haas, and Haas doesn't want to sell at this moment in time. If, the Formula One's current boom isn't able to be sustained and values of teams drop, then, sure, Haas is, he's a savvy businessman. He's going to see sort of values dropping and go, okay, now's the right time to sell, because it might not necessarily come back in such a strong way. But I think just from a personal point of view, I was disappointed with that decision, not to let Andretti on the grid. I think, yeah, sure, the team might struggle in the first few years, but that's not really for F1 to say. It's not really for them to say, well, you might struggle, so you're not going to get a place on the grid, because there have been so many teams that have come to F1 and have stuck it out and have improved. So I think a lot of people were very unhappy with that.
Alex, I just want to come to you on this one as well, because you two have different opinions on this slightly with some of these topics we discuss. And on this one here, I wonder what you think. Is it a reasonable idea that, maybe Andretti should come in and just make Gene Haas an offer he can't refuse?
Yeah, I mean, that certainly would make a lot of sense in one direction. I'm sort of told that if Gene Haas sold up now, he'd make all his money back and maybe even a little bit of a profit. That's just a reflection of how much F1 teams have increased in value. We're talking about them approaching nearly $1 billion, or in terms of overall worth. So it'd be a lot for Andretti to have to do that, but maybe that's the best option. We just don't know. Like there's too many unknowns on the Haas front right now. What I would say on Andretti is that, yeah, I think it's definitely very disappointing that there's not another team. I think it's like protectionism and too much inner thinking from the other teams in terms of what they've always said about the anti-dilution fee and the potential hit to their earnings, right? But I also think at the same time, there's a lot of sense in what F1 put out, particularly the bits when it came to Andretti building a brand new car for 2025 and then having to produce essentially another one to very different regulations for 2026. I think there's a lot of like, oh, hang on a minute, that is a really big challenge. It's a really big challenge for all the existing teams anyway. So to do it from scratch, when historically, where's the last example of a new team coming in and winning immediately? Like in the modern era, I cannot think of one. Do not bring Brawn GP into this, because obviously that doesn't count. And there's also the point about, they've announced this deal with General Motors, but it's not exactly a full works supply. So there was this suggestion that there would be another power manufacturer. I think it's probably end up going to be Renault being forced to do that, and feeling quite unhappy about its intellectual property then potentially being used to benefit General Motors. So there was still a lot of like not satisfactory answers from the Andretti side. But overall, I do agree that I think it would have been brilliant to have the Andretti name in Formula One, because what a fantastic addition to motorsport, and what a fantastic achievements in motorsport it has already got. And also, we do want to see more teams and more drivers. Wouldn't it have been fantastic to see an American driver come over and succeed in Formula One, or at the very least, show well against what Formula One is constantly claiming, even though that's definitely not accurate in terms of certain numbers of the drivers on the grid, that these are the best drivers in the world.
On the point of creating two separate different cars for 2025 and 2026, first of all, the reason Andretti wanted to come in for 25 was because the Concord agreement is set to be renewed for 2026. It's likely that the teams voting for their own interests are going to want that closed from 12, which is the maximum a number of teams allows, to 10. So it would make it a lot more difficult for a new team to come in. So that's why they were gunning for 2025. It is a massive challenge to get a car for 25, and then for the new technical regulations, whatever shape or form they come in with regards to aero package for 26. It is a big undertaking, but it's been done before. Haas has done it before in 2016. It had to build a car to very different technical regulations for 2017 with the wider cars. If we go back a few years to when I kind of started watching, Stewart did it in 97 and then had to build a narrow track car for 98. So it's been done before. Obviously, F1 now is massively specialized and highly technologically advanced, but at the same time, teams are governed by cost cap, and that's something that would help in the long run. So I think it's understandable. Maybe it's a little bit flimsy. I think ultimately it's just the existing F1 teams didn't want another team, and they were willing to find whatever evidence that it might make it more difficult to have an 11th team. I think one of the reasons that F1 gave was that it didn't think the team would add value. GM coming in 2028, they were saying, okay, wait until 2028 when they do come in, because then you might be able to bring some value. That Christian Horner point that tracks might not be able to fit 22 teams, again, one of the flimsiest arguments given. We've seen Apex GP, F1 experiences and various various circuits having more than, enough space for 22 plus cars, that was cited as well. So I think some of the arguments are flimsy, and I think ultimately the lack of honesty just annoys me a little bit. It's just like, okay, if it's about money, just say it is. Don't beat about the bush.
Also, I think what we can agree on is that it sets up for another very interesting chapter of F1 versus the FIA, because obviously the FIA were very much approving the Andretti entry.
Yeah, I mean, and we have kind of touched on it a little bit here, but do you think it's the other side of things that, Formula One seemingly trying to expand into America and promote themselves into North America anyway, and here's a golden opportunity to bring in a huge American motorsport giant in Andretti. Do you think that they've missed a trick, or is it literally just kicking the can down the road?
If I want to be super cynical about this, I would suggest that it wants American money. I don't know if it necessarily wants American teams or American drivers. Certainly a driver would be marketable. It has one in Logan Sargent, but there was the case a couple of years ago of Colton Herta looking at a potential Formula One seat. Super license requirements denied him of that, and he wasn't going to get an exemption, despite the fact that he's been a very, very strong driver in IndyCar and has a lot of promise, matched up to Lando Norris in their junior career as well. I think that was something that Trevor Carlin, who ran both drivers during their junior categories, was something that he was very vocal on, and was surprised that Herta wasn't going to be allowed a chance. So it just seems to be this kind of duality of F1 wants this exposure in the US, and it wants the money, and it wants the big businesses to come in, and even these big brands like General Motors, but it just seems to devalue the idea of an Andretti coming in, despite the fact that Andretti is a massive name in international motorsport, IndyCar, Formula E reigning champions, and even expanding into IMSA and other categories as well. It's got a huge pedigree, and there's the association with Mario Andretti, the champion in 1978. So yeah, to me, I think it's a miss. I'm biased because I'd love to see Andretti in Formula One. So for me, it always comes with that caveat. But yeah, I think they've missed a trick here.
You're biased, JBL, because you're the most American British person I've ever met. But I do agree with what you're saying. It's a massive own goal. It's like it's like they've shot themselves in the foot when it comes to like attracting specific or certain areas of motorsport fans in America. Right? Just look at the reaction from a load of the IndyCar drivers and a load of people who follow IndyCar really, really closely. Like, it just doesn't seem to make a lot of sense. To put that back to them, though, F1 is an American company. It is owned by Liberty Media. This is an American company making an American decisions. And also there's been this tag of, F1 is elitist. It's like, well, motorsport. Do you know the history of motorsport? It's about rich people driving very, very expensive cars. It has never not been elitist in any category, including America. So I just thought that tag, if you'll pardon the pun, was a bit rich.
Oh, I like it. Knock that one out the park there, Alex. That's the best pun we've had so far today. And I did bring the Haas one in earlier on just to refresh your memories. And that means I can't edit that bit out of the video, right? So now, just to finish off this podcast quickly, Alex, talking to you about the announcement that was made slightly earlier today. And that is that Suzuka, as owners, Honda, they've announced the extension of their contract for another 5 years, which means the Japanese Grand Prix will be held at Suzuka until at least 2029. Now, it's a huge fan favourite circuit, isn't it? What do you reckon? What are your thoughts?
Yeah, excellent news. I think obviously the three of us are British. I'm sure there is many of our viewers, many of our listeners will share these, have these wonderful memories of getting up at 4 a.m., 5 a.m. to watch the Japanese Grand Prix. If I think back to, too many years ago now, but the late 90s and, those Mika Hakkinen, Michael Schumacher title deciders, just that always brings a good memory there. And then there's just the fact that it's one of those iconic tracks. Like, just listen to what the drivers say about Suzuka in 2022. Sebastian Vettel, Fernando Alonso, just talking about how much they love it. Max Verstappen clearly absolutely adores the place. So yeah, it's one of those key things that, in the sort of light that you've got a Madrid street track coming, which is just another street track that will look exactly the same as all the other ones that have joined the calendar in recent years. It's lovely to see this sort of, commitment and investment to a historic and also very exciting track. There was this suggestion that maybe there might be a race in Osaka, which is actually much closer to Suzuka than Tokyo is. But Potentially the talk was it would run alongside Suzuka and sort of, have like Pacific Grand Prix and things like that running along the Japanese Grand Prix, alongside the Japanese Grand Prix in the past. I do wonder perhaps whether that was more of a potential bargaining tactic, pressure being applied to Honda and the Suzuka owners and things like that. But yeah, overall, excellent story that Suzuka's sticking around.
JBL, I think you must at least agree with Alex on that one. It is a great place, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly. It's always been one of my favourites to watch, play on in video games, and having picked up the F1 baton for the first time last year, I was lucky enough to get to go, and I think Alex is going for the first time this year, and I'm excited for you, man. Like, it's going to be, you're going to have such a great time. It's just such a great place to go. And to go trackside and watch the cars go through like the Dunlop curve, go through the Degners, even the infamous Casio Triangle where Senna and Prost came together in 1989. It is an iconic venue, and I think just getting there and seeing all of the fans, their fervent support, it's just such a great place to go. It feels like a proper F1 venue. So yeah, long may it continue.
Well, there we go. We know that the Japanese Grand Prix is going to be held at Suzuka till at least 2029. Will Haas be there in 2029? We don't know, but what we do know is what their car should look like this season. Thanks so much to Alex and to JBL for casting their eyes over it and giving us their thoughts. And don't forget, we've got more launches coming up. That's the first one of 2024. More coming up on Monday with Stake Sauber and Williams. It's their turn. So make sure you hit the subscribe button and stay across all of that and the rest coming up in the coming weeks. Thanks so much for watching. We'll see you next time.